Payroll Salary Guide. I'm Anthony McElwee. I have over 12 years of experience in recruitment, with almost 7 of those here in Calgary. I've spent almost all of my career hiring for accounting and finance roles, so I have lots of experience in this space. I'll go through the presentation today, and at the end I'll be joined for questions by Stephen Van Alstyne, who will also chip in as we go along here with his opinion, who is the Payroll Association's Vice President of Education. So thanks for joining us, Stephen.
It's a pleasure to be here, Anthony.
So, before I get into this year's findings, some background information about the report and how it was compiled. Many of you are probably already familiar with it, since it is our 5th annual Payroll Salary Guide, and this year was based on a salary of more than 1,900 payroll professionals in Canada. From their responses, we have compared a number of year-on-year trends in compensation, activity, and hiring. From these key findings, we make hiring and career recommendations for payroll employers and workers. So, what did the survey show this year? Let's start with business activity from the last year, and then we'll look at how that compares to previous years. In 2017, you can see that more than half of payroll employers saw business activity increase, while less than 10% say that activity decreased. That's a busy year for payroll workers. It's 8% higher than we saw in 2016. Looking ahead, another 9% expect activity to increase this year, with almost 2/3 saying that they will be busier in 2018 than they were in 2017. How does that fit into the last few years of data? This graph shows activity increases every year. Let's focus on the dark purple charts, which indicate the actual increase in activity. You can see that 60% of payroll teams saw activity increase in 2014, but there was a very sharp drop in 2015. That's when the oil and gas downturn began, which had a knock-on effect across almost every industry in Canada. As this trend line shows, activity has increased steadily since 2015, and now expectations for next year are almost on par with what we saw in 2014. So you're all busy, which I'm sure you all know already, but what does that mean, or what does all that activity mean for hiring and headcount? Not much, unfortunately, is the answer. This chart shows 3 years of permanent hiring, and the dark grey bar is where headcount stayed the same. So you've had 4 years of steady activity increases, but headcount has remained the same almost across the board. Just 17% of employers expect to increase headcount this year, which is lower than the proportion that increased staffing numbers in 2017. So if activity is increasing, but headcount isn't, then that can only mean one thing. Payroll employees are carrying a heavier workload. Technology may be able to cushion that blow somewhat, but as we'll see later in the presentation, it doesn't look like companies are making the most of existing and emerging technology. One other way of managing workloads without increasing full-time headcount is by using temporary or contract workers. So let's take a look at whether payroll employers are doing that. Well, it's a yes and a no. Yes, about a quarter of you are, but it looks like it's generally unplanned and ad hoc. Now, how do I know that? Well, let's look at 2017's expectation and reality. That dark purple column is double the predicted. So twice as many employers increased their use of temps last year compared to expectations. We've looked back at this trend, and it is true every single year that we've produced this report. In fact, the smallest increase we found was still 50% higher than predicted. In 2015, the year of the oil and gas downturn, when we saw 1 in 6 payroll employers decrease headcount, 1/3 of those who used temps increased staffing levels. Temporary and contract workers are a great way to bring in the workers that you need for the amount of time that you need them. However, if it's always unexpected, then you could be facing unnecessary risks. I would suggest looking for patterns in your use of temps. If you always need the same skills or it's around the same time of the year, plan ahead to bring the right people in at the right time. This will improve your efficiency and make sure that there are no budget surprises throughout the year.
Anthony, Anthony, it's Stephen. I just wanted to interject for a second on that comment that you made and validate that comment. I think if we did go and look at sort of where the timing is with the use of temps particularly, it probably is in periods of ebb and flow, and a big period where there's exceptional time that is required in the payroll department is often around year-end time, when you're closing off year-end, when you're reconciling your year-end, when you're producing your information slips for your employees. So very valid point, and I just want to echo that comment that that's commonly the time frame probably where most organizations would find that they need that extra support.
Yeah, I would totally agree, Stephen. And in most industries, there are peaks and troughs throughout the year that are fairly trackable. In retail, for example, the hiring crazy trend that happens around Christmas and the other busy times of the year. And
exactly.
If people go and look at their historical hiring trends, then yeah, they can get in front of that and be a little more organized in terms of finding people for their organizations.
Yeah, and you also make the comment about economic downturn. Obviously, organizations that are doing more layoffs or terminations, that requires extra effort being put forward, particularly in the HR and payroll space, and can require certainly, again, ebbs and flows with regard to the effort that has to be put toward that.
Totally agree. So now moving on to the meat of a salary guide, what's happening with compensation? Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag at the moment. This chart here shows trends in salary increases with 0% in light purple at the far left and more than 10% in the darkest purple at the far right. The main trend that we're seeing here is a slight bounce back from the reduced number of increases in 2015 and 16. As this trend line shows, in 2014, more than a third of people were getting a salary increase of more than 3%. This reached an historic low in 2016 when it was just a quarter. Now looking ahead, that has increased. While 2018's expectations are still slightly short of 2014, it's going to be a healthy direction that we're heading in. It's good to see at the same time that the number of people getting no salary increase has also reduced from a high in 2016 of 33% to just 1 in 5 of you expected in the next year to not get an increase. This is all the more positive than the main Hays Canada overall salary guide, where less than a quarter of companies are offering salary increases above 3% in 2018, compared to more than a third of payroll employers. And finally, in this section, let's take a look at benefits. We asked payroll respondents which benefits were the most important to them and compared it to the most common benefits. Now, the good news is that there was a lot of alignment. Here are the benefits that are the most important to payroll professionals. There's no big surprises here, as health and dental, pension matching, flexible work, and training and certification support all make the cut. But now let's just look at the employers who are offering more than just the top 2. So just 1 in 5 employers are offering all 5 of these top benefits. It's an easy way to stand out if you're missing a couple of these. And even when we narrow it down to just the top 3, health and dental, extended health benefits, and pension matching, only 41% of employers are offering all of these. Okay, so that's an overview of the big picture findings. Next, I want to pull out a few key findings and offer some suggestions. First, I'll take a look at some of the trends for employers, and then we'll offer some trends and suggestions for individuals. If you're not currently a manager, then the next couple of slides might not be as relevant for you today, but if that's a position you're aspiring to, then it's a great idea to collect information ahead of time. We asked employers about their main challenges around recruitment and retention and found some interesting comparisons. Almost 3/4 of employers say they have difficulty hiring, but only 1/4 say they have trouble hanging on to the people within their team. And employers report that junior to mid-level people are the hardest to recruit, which I would totally agree with. So once you have the people you need on your team, then you're set. That's great. But getting them on your team in the first place is the real challenge. Any employer who is hiring is going to struggle to find the people they need, and the 20% looking to increase headcount this year will be most effective. Even if you are just planning to fill one role this year, it could be a challenge. So what can you do to be prepared? Firstly, I would say plan your hiring well in advance where possible. If you know you'll be hiring this year, give yourself as long a lead time as possible because you know it's going to be tough to find great people out there right now. The Hays Canada 2018 Salary Guide found that 42% of employers say it takes more than 2 months to fill a full-time role, so you may need more time than you think. Expand your network now. So when you have unexpected turnover or other reasons that mean that you need to suddenly hire, you have immediate access to a great talent pool. That could mean reconnecting with a recruiter or simply becoming more active in the Payroll Association itself. And finally, do you know what makes your company the best place for payroll professionals to work, and can you articulate it? If you can't answer that question, then neither can your candidates. This could be a competitive salary, sought-after benefits that we've just talked about, a great work culture, or opportunities for career growth. Ideally, I would say you need a combination of more than one of these. Now let's look at how candidates assess a job offer and how that aligns with employer priorities. We asked respondents, what was the most important thing when accepting a job offer? Unsurprisingly, compensation was the top, but it is only a third of the decision. Next comes benefit and work-life balance, which are almost equal and combine to be roughly the same as compensation. Then, after that comes company culture, training, and career progression. So that's what payroll people want, but where are employers focusing their energy in attracting candidates? Well, benefits are top of mind, then followed by compensation and culture. These are all important factors, and I really don't want to downplay them at all, but you can see immediately that a lot of employers are missing factors that are important to candidates. Work-life balance is the obvious one here, but I would recommend combining these messages. How do your benefits and culture support a work-life balance and career progression? What does work-life balance really look like in your organization?
Anthony, before we move on to the next slide, I just want to make a comment regarding the training and professional development. It seems that it looks like from the results that you had shared that employers look like they're willing to promote and attract candidates and utilize training and professional development more so than employees themselves. And that's interesting because you know, more and more certifications and professional designations that are out there are requiring employees obviously to be maintaining and being up to date, and that's certainly very critical within the payroll space. So it's positive to see that employers are supporting training and development, and in some cases I think it's while there might not be a formal policy in place at the organization, I think employees don't need to make sure that they're not shy about asking their employers for that, because it looks like they're very much supporting that. So I just wanted to make that comment about that area.
Yeah, look, I would totally agree, Stephen, and I think the trend that we're seeing in the marketplace is increasingly things like your certification that used to be a nice to have with most payroll roles that we're recruiting for these days, it's become an essential skill as opposed to a nice to have. So I would agree, and I would fully encourage people to explore those training and professional development opportunities that their employer is prepared to support them in, because you're right, there are more employers who are prepared to support that than people who rate that highly when they're accepting a job.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
So just moving on here, employers often think that flexible work options are the start and end of supporting work-life balance. I'm including them here because I think they do play a role in demonstrating that you care about your employees' personal lives and are looking for ways to help them succeed at work and at home. But sometimes it's just not possible to offer formal work from home or flexible work options. Now, does that mean you're not supporting a work-life balance? Not necessarily. I think the most important aspect of work-life balance is really having a supportive environment. Feeling able to take your sick leave and vacation days, knowing you can go to the doctor if you need to, or take an hour out for a bank appointment. These aspects are very hard to sum up, and it's not necessarily formal flexible work policies, but it requires employers to respect their team's time and efforts and trust them to get the job done while still allowing people the freedom to meet their personal needs. And finally, I want to talk about reward and recognition, because in my personal opinion and experience, what people mean when they talk about balance is not equal time or equal effort, but what they get back, that they get back what they put in. I think a combination of a supportive work environment where someone can leave for an hour to go to the dentist or leave early to go to their kid's sports day, with a culture of reward and recognition can more than make up for flexible work options. And in fact, if you have flexible work hours on paper, but in practice don't have a supporting work environment or appropriate reward and recognition, then your team is unlikely to feel like they have the balance that they want. Okay, so I think that this is of interest to both individuals and teams or managers. Every year we ask how people are spending their time, and for the past 3 years we've seen a surprising pattern in the answers. This year, payroll practitioners say they spend 40% of their time on administration. By itself, I don't think that statistic is necessarily good or bad, but what I found was interesting is that has gone up from 35% 2 years ago. So people are spending more time on admin today than they were last year or the year before. Now that surprises me because of the continuing advances we're seeing in technology. I think it might either mean that companies are not keeping up with new software and technology, or it's just not having the effect on efficiency that we would expect. Now, when we look at managers, they spend 26% of their time on administration, and this has been pretty steady for the last few years. However, to put that in some context, it's 1/3 more time than they spend on managing or supervising people, which really surprised me. If you're spending 1/4 of your time on administrative tasks, it's time to look at where you can find efficiencies or delegate those tasks to your team so you can really focus on leading and developing them.
Anthony, if I could just make a comment on this area as well, because this is an area obviously that we pay very close attention to, particularly because part of our mandate here at the association is to provide efficiency and effectiveness for legislation and regulation and how practitioners and managers, their responsibilities around that, how that can be helped. And what we're finding is, sometimes you take a step forward, like the move to having T4s being able to be produced electronically for the employees, and then you take a step back. So the most recent changes to Ontario employment standards, for example, some of the calculations for statutory holiday, for example, that changed, really increased administration. And as much as sometimes technology can be used to respond to that, there's always the intermediary period where you're making transition, where you have to be cognizant of those legislative changes and how those impact. So, administration still remains a really big factor, particularly for practitioners And to your point, it seems disproportionate on the management side comparative to what we expect managers would be doing, which is managing and supervising their employees. So it's really interesting to kind of watch this trend, and particularly to see that it's increasing on the practitioner side in an environment where we suspect with technological advances and certainly talk of artificial intelligence and things like that, that it's going to kind of start reducing, but that's really not what we're seeing. So, you know, the data really speaks volumes here, I think.
Yeah, I agree, Stephen, and like I say, I was very surprised by the trend. It was certainly going in the opposite direction to what we all expected here, and myself included. So, moving on. Administration is often a core task for payroll coordinators and administrators, so I don't think we'll ever see that disappear as a major use of their time. However, I think getting it below that 35% mark is a really good goal to have. Firstly, look at your work priorities where administration fits into them. Make sure that your time is focused on the things that are the most important, and sometimes that might actually be administration. But if you start tracking now how you spend your time, you might see places where you're doing admin because it's the top of the pile, not necessarily because it's the most important task. I'd encourage you all to look at technology as an enabler, bearing in mind Stephen's comments there that there are some manual things that you have to do, but wherever you can use technology, you should be looking at doing that. If you can manage your tasks in bulk, organize your time better, automate some processes, then these are all things that open up your time for the more important, more strategic tasks. And finally, look for efficiencies. Where are the opportunities to group tasks together or automate them? Can you divide administration tasks amongst the team? So maybe each person is responsible for one type of task, which allows people to get faster at specific jobs, as opposed to switching between tasks and slowing yourselves down. So, 1 in 4 payroll professionals don't know market rate. This finding surprised me for a profession that actually spends its days paying everyone else. Just 41% of payroll workers say that their salary is competitive, but more than a quarter don't actually know what their market rate is. There was a distinct drop from last year where 47% said that their pay was competitive, which is actually a similar trend to what we saw in the overall Hays Canada Salary Guide, so it's not just in payroll that that's happening. However, if the main change was salaries themselves, so people were being paid less than market rate, I would expect that there would be a big jump in saying that their salary was not competitive. Now this did increase, but there was also a big increase in the number saying they didn't know what their market rate was. So not only are fewer people saying their salary is competitive, but more people simply don't know what a competitive salary would look like. As the absolute basics, you need to know what market rate is. What are other payroll professionals earning at your level? Now there are lots of things that affect salary, including company size, payroll complexity, whether you have your certification, and the number of years of experience you've got. This guide is a great starting point, or you can talk to your local Hays recruiter about what they're seeing in the market. I would also recommend thinking about your priorities. Salary is important, but other factors can contribute more to your day-to-day happiness, such as culture fit, opportunities to learn, or even location. Don't prioritize pay over everything else and sacrifice your own happiness. And on a related note, keep in mind that total compensation is important when you're assessing a job. Health, training, retirement, and other benefits can have a big financial impact for you, so make sure you're considering the total package and considering these in combination with the last point about knowing what your priorities are. So what does it take to advance in your career? We've asked managers how education or certifications affected their decision to promote. And 88% of them said it made them more likely to promote someone So there is definitely an advantage to investing in your own education. And going back to our point earlier, Stephen, there are clearly a lot of employers who are prepared to support that education, so people should definitely be taking advantage of that.
Yeah, and Anthony, you made a comment earlier that it is becoming a requirement, and it certainly is now. Even though a payroll certification isn't a requirement, it's not a legislated requirement to be a practitioner, it is certainly a differentiator, and these results are quite incredibly supportive of that.
Totally agree. And leading on from that, we also found that people who have a certification are 56% more likely to be managers. So there is absolutely a direct connection between getting certified and pushing your career forward. Finally, whilst most payroll practitioners report to accounting, the 1/3 of you who report to HR were more likely to be active in the business beyond the transactional day-to-day tasks. For example, they were 20% more likely to say that they made recommendations to the business. So, how can you propel your career forward? Firstly, I would advise you to invest in continual learning. That designation or certification could have a significant impact on your career. And it's not just about getting a certificate at the end. Continual learning is about showing that you're proactively investing in your own progression, and that will help you stay up to date with the latest skills and trends. Secondly, I always recommend putting in some time and effort into your network. The people you know are critical to your career progression. This means other payroll professionals, maybe through the association or training opportunities, but I think there is often a missed opportunity around internal networking, as in getting to know the other leaders within your current employer. Really trying to raise your profile and your team's profile in your company is the first step in becoming a trusted advisor, not just a transactional department. And finally, if you are thinking about moving, be strategic. Where do you want to go? What are your short-term, medium-term, and long-term career goals? In some cases, that may mean looking for a role that reports to HR, but it could also be a relocation, a lateral move to give yourself a new challenge, or a change in industry where you see opportunities for growth. So on to the summary. Firstly, I'll look at some of the trends for employers, and then we'll offer some trends and suggestions for individuals. Payroll professionals say they are busy and getting busier with activity approaching 2014 levels. However, companies are not increasing resources, so people are having to do more with less. Employers report that recruitment is hard, especially for the junior to intermediate level, but that retention is easy. Companies that can close the expectation gap between what the employer offers and what professionals want will secure the team that they really need. Actions you can take today. Number one, plan ahead. Think long-term for both hiring and your career. Be proactive and start building a talent pipeline. And be strategic when you decide to change roles yourself. Number two, grow your network. Who do you know and who knows you will always matter for career progression. Invest time in your network and find new opportunities for growth. Number three, know your priorities. Whether this means investing in technology to improve your administration efficiency or finally getting that certification, look at your professional priorities and figure out how to achieve your goals. And finally, number four, keep track of the market. If you only check in on market trends every few years, you could find yourself behind the times. Regular check-ins will help you be competitive, both as an individual planning your career and as an employer who wants to hang on to the very best talent. So that's everything we have for you today. We do have approximately 10 minutes here for questions, and Stephen is also on the line with me, obviously. So feel free to send your questions through the chat function, and we will both endeavour to answer them as best we possibly can.
One of the comments that I want to make, Anthony, that while we're waiting for questions to come in, is to just support some of the things that you have been saying, but particularly one of the things that we found, and we really appreciate the work that Hayes does to get this information, is that, you know, certification holders, we've done that comparison between those that have certification and those that do not in terms of the salary. And one of the big findings in the salary guide itself is that in almost every category, with the exception of a couple of categories where individuals have less experience, certification certainly commands a much higher salary for those individuals, those particular individuals, and sometimes it can be as much as $10,000 more. So that's you know, obviously a consideration that supports the comments around why certification is so key and why keeping up to date and educated is so important in this role in particular. Yeah,
I would agree. So we've got questions come through here. Do the employers say why junior and mid-level employees are the most difficult to hire? 78% is high. And what are they looking for? Is there a problem with the potential employee's skill level, or is it an employer benefit issue? I think, so there's a couple of pieces to this. Like number one is candidates with that level of experience are unlikely to tick all of the boxes that you've got when you're hiring someone. So it's really important to prioritize what are my must-have skills versus the nice-to-haves. Can you clearly communicate what your brand is and why people want to work for that company? And I think increasingly with employees at this kind of level, all the stuff that we just talked about around work-life balance and really walking the talk when it comes to a flexible work environment is very important. So I think that the more clear that employers can be about the must-to-haves and the nice-to-haves and how they communicate what they like to work for, the easier it will be to hire people at that level. But there's absolutely a shortage of payroll candidates at the junior to intermediate level.
Yeah,
is there anything else you'd add to that, Stephen?
Yeah, I'd just like to add some observations too, Anthony, because I think the biggest challenge when you're looking for entry-level individuals is that they are untested. The one thing that we have done is made experience a requirement of the certification, but individuals who have that academic requirement are candidates, and we are suggesting that those are individuals who are primed for those entry-level or junior positions because it gives them the opportunity to take that academic learning and put it into practice. And unfortunately, you know, like anything, everybody needs to get that experience, and sometimes it's taking a chance on an individual who demonstrates that they have a capacity for the role, but sometimes that academic underpinning really helps to enhance that or support that. So again, employers can do things to try to identify better candidates for a role, and having that, you know, that certification is certainly something that identifies, when you look at, again, what is it that practitioners are doing, or where are they spending their time? They're spending it on communication, they're spending it on administration, they're spending it on compliance, and those are all aspects of a certification program. And then it gives them the opportunity to put that into practice. And again, it helps an organization segment who it is that they can be looking at when they're trying to get good candidates for the roles that they have.
Yeah, I would totally agree. There's the old adage, hire for attitude and train skill, and I think that's especially important in a candidate short market. And I think the more that people do that junior to mid-level and payroll, the easier they'll find it to find those people. So we just had another one come through here saying, would you expect to receive a higher salary in a remote location? That's an interesting one. One of the business units that Hayes runs is resources and mining, and we also run another one, oil and gas. So we actually have quite a bit of experience in remote recruitment in general. And the answer to that question from my perspective would be yes and no. I think increasingly we are seeing employers in remote locations coming to the party with a relocation assistance of some description. So there's a reduced cost in the candidate moving there. But often we're also seeing them say, we'll pay the same salary that the individual may have earned in a Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, other major metropolitan centres, but our cost of living here is significantly lower, so we feel that is the premium that the person earns for working here. We're not necessarily seeing people paid big uplifts for going to remote parts of Canada anymore, whereas I think 5 years ago we probably did see a fair bit of that. Is there anything else you'd add on that, Stephen, or like has the association had any experience with stuff?
I think that's certainly an area where Hayes has the expertise in terms of seeing what you see in particular. And again, you have a niche market, particularly with regard to oil and gas and mining, which tend to be roles that are more remote. So I think you've really hit the nail on the head in terms of identifying that obviously in some industries and in some remote locations you're going to attract higher salaries, and that's not necessarily going to always be the case.
Yeah, great. Here's another one. Is the current increase in administrative duties due to companies being reluctant to expand on their use of technological solutions as well, or as a result of well-publicized payroll fiascos? Well, interesting question. I think like the simple answer to that is, like Stephen mentioned before, that there are certain things that just have to be done manually. The recent changes in Ontario is an example, I think, that you cited there, Stephen, that there is no real technological solution to that. And yeah, I think there is increasing publicity when things go wrong with payroll systems as they're implemented, not just in Canada but globally. Paying people correctly and on time is such an important thing for people that it does hit the media pretty quickly when you get it wrong. I'm not sure.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure if that's the only thing. Sorry, what were you going to say, Stephen?
I was just going to say, Anthony, to support what you're saying, I think obviously there's a very big issue in Canada currently that's getting a lot of publicity from a technology perspective. And I think the one thing that organizations have to remember is that you can bring all the bells and whistles and all the great technology that you want, but if individuals don't have that base understanding, the compliance and legislative requirement and the underpinnings related to that and how that connects into a system, you can have the best system in the world, but if people don't understand how to utilize it, then you're going to run into some difficulties. So I think in an organization's rush or again, sometimes it's senior level or C-suite individuals that are making decisions around changes to a system or implementing a system, and they cannot underestimate the impact that a payroll practitioner or a payroll manager can have in terms of providing input and understanding how the system works. And, this is not a simple process, and you make a very good point, Anthony, that it is about paying accurately and on time, but you can have the most straightforward payroll, but if the system is not reflecting technologically how that links to the compliance and legislative requirements, then an organization is going to quickly run itself into some trouble. And again, we've seen a lot of that in the media, particularly in Canada of late.
Yeah, I would agree. It's again, to use an old adage, garbage in, garbage out. You can have the flashiest system in the world, but if it's not set up properly, then it's not much help. And I can't tell you how many times through my career we've been asked to place a payroll implementation person to come and fix an implementation that's gone wrong. So, yeah, I would agree. So we've got an interesting one here. I thought it was interesting that payroll professionals that reported to HR made 20% more recommendations to their organization. Do you think having payroll in HR rather than finance increases payroll's perceived value to the company? I think that's an interesting question personally, and maybe after I've answered, we'll get your viewpoint, Stephen. I think that it just demonstrates that it's perceived in different ways. Like, I think typically when payroll's based in finance, it's a far more reporting-based function, and it's a more transactional kind of an arrangement. Whereas typically when payroll is in HR, it's more likely to be involved in human capital planning, organizational development. It's less about the reporting and the numbers and more about what's going into the payroll and what's coming out of the payroll, if that makes sense. Do you have a sense for that, Stephen?
Yeah, I think this is an excellent question, Anthony, and I want to support what you're saying. What we tend to find is that accounting, and because finance and accounting usually have responsibilities over, the revenue side of things and the numbers, they tend to think that payroll is just, a very transactional component of what they do more holistically, whereas HR and, the link to things like employment and labor standards and the reporting and the compliance aspects, because HR tends not, and I'm making some generalizations here, tends not to have as much of a comfort level around the management of numbers and the compliance components, I think it gives payroll a better opportunity under it being under the HR umbrella. And it also tends to be what we have found, that payroll tends to report through to HR more in larger organizations. And again, I think the opportunities are going to be stronger under that requirement. If it's in a smaller organization where it tends to report more to finance or under a controller or somebody within the finance responsibility, there tends not to be as much of an opportunity to provide that input or to take on such a, a larger and more influential role in terms of administering the payroll and making decisions around the payroll.
Yeah, I would agree. Here's probably a question for you, Stephen. Talking with students that are completing their education, a lot of them talk about how hard it is to get that first job in their desired payroll or HR field. Is there any liaison between the Canadian Payroll Association, schools and employers to try and help bridge this gap?
Yeah, that's a question that we often get asked. And quite frankly, the biggest challenge for some of the individuals that are making decisions around taking the certification and getting that first opportunity in a payroll role is not unique versus any other profession. So whether it be HR, whether it be accounting. So what we're doing at the association is bringing more attention to those candidates and those individuals who have the academic underpinning and are looking for that first role or that first opportunity in an entry-level organization. So we are working with our members and working with the more general business community to make them aware of the opportunities that exist. We're also looking to promote ways that we can bring attention to certification. And as you've identified, Anthony, organizations are now commonly making it a requirement for payroll roles. And then just, I think, working really with recruitment firms like yours. We have a great relationship with Hayes and other recruitment firms, and making them aware of the requirement, what the requirement is, and what organizations are looking for. And I think that's going to help as well. And then oftentimes we get organizations that will come to us directly that are looking for ways that that we can help them from a recruitment perspective. So one of the things that we are looking at the association is a mentorship program so that we can align individuals who are newly certified with individuals who have longer term experience within payroll. And so I would encourage individuals who are on the webinar today who are looking for roles to keep their eyes on our association, because that's something that we want to look at being able to expand more in the future. Because, one of the big points that you raise, Anthony, is networking and being tapped into a network. And an association is a great way to do that. But we have to also help individuals through different mechanisms, and that's one that we're looking at right now.
Fantastic. Yeah, I totally agree, Stephen. That networking is all important, and as we pointed out earlier in the presentation, networking with the association is a big part of that as well. Sounds like you guys are doing some great stuff helping out junior and graduate candidates there. So look, I think that's the end of the questions that we've got. So thank you everyone for your time today. As it says on the slide here, you can get your copy of the report at www.hayes.ca/payroll, and have a great rest of your day.